official activities of the Socorro Bayanihan services ended today, with its leader as well as 3 other officials of the group being cited for contempt.
And later in the show, we will be joined by 2023 Ramon Magsaysay Awardee Miriam Coronel-Ferrer for a discussion on her journey as a peace negotiator, as well as women's role in peace building.
Welcome to the show. I'm Gretchen.
I'm Maricel Halili.
And I'm Shawn.
Shawn must say there's a virus being talked about these days. It's not COVID, it's different. You may have heard of it. It's called Nipah virus. Well, if you haven't heard of it, here's what you should know. It's a zoonotic virus, meaning it's transmitted from animals to humans, specifically from bats and pigs. It can be acquired from contaminated food, contact with infected animals, and direct human-to-human transmission. The symptoms are similar to that of the flu, with fever, headache, cough, and sore throat. Some also report difficulty in breathing and vomiting. There's no available treatment or vaccine for this virus yet. The World Health Organization also reports that fatality rate from the virus is at 40 to 75%.
There's already a new outbreak of the virus in India with at least 5 confirmed cases, 2 of whom have died. This is already the 4th Nipah virus outbreak in India. The deadliest one was back in 2018. Past outbreaks have also been reported in Malaysia, Singapore, and Bangladesh.
Our own health department says there is no case of the Nipah virus in the Philippines yet. This is because there has been no laboratory confirmed cases at the moment. But there has been reported rise of flu-like illnesses in Cagayan de Oro, but the DOH says it's still not clear whether this is the Nipah virus or a different infection.
Here to talk to us about the Nipah virus is infectious disease expert and DOH advisor Dr. Rontgene Solante. Magandang gabi po sa inyo, Doc. Doc, una sa lahat, this virus has been around, sabi nga, since 1999. Ano yung nag-trigger, bakit nabubuhay na naman itong virus na ito?
Well, I think this is a virus that has not been really eradicated. Primarily dahil ang carrier nito is fruit bats. No? And when you have a zoonotic disease or infection, it's difficult for us to eradicate that because you need also to eradicate the carrier, which is the fruit bat, which is very difficult to eradicate. And I think the reason most scientists agree on this is because of climate change and urbanization, that it has disrupted the living conditions of these fruit bats, that they are now more nearer to people. And that's the reason why we have outbreaks in Bangladesh. And I think this is the 3rd outbreak in India, in the same province of Kerala, which brings a higher rate of mortality compared to COVID. And this is an infection that most commonly affect the brain. We call it encephalitis. That's why the fatality rate is really high, or the mortality rate is very high.
Doc, everything that you said just quite scary. How concerned should we be here in the Philippines, given climate change, and also what temperatures does the virus thrive in?
Well, if you look at the history of Nipah virus, it usually occurs in those areas where these particular fruit bats are common. I don't know if this fruit bat is also endemic in our country. But it's something that we need to investigate. No? Kung itong fruit bat na to is also the same. We have fruit bats naman talaga, no? But I'm not so sure if these fruit bats are the same as that found in Malaysia, in Bangladesh. And there was a time also Singapore had cases also, and in India. No? But again, I cannot totally rule out the possibility that one day, but not necessarily this. I hope it's not this year. That there can be an infection like this because of the carrier is also an animal, which is also found here in the Philippines.
Right, Dr. Solante, it seems like this specific virus thrives and goes around here in Asia. As far as transmission goes, as we have said, no, mga 43 years, 42 years in existence na that we know of ang Nipah virus. And so far, outbreaks have been contained. So is it not as fast to transmit as COVID-19? For instance, kasi parang nasusugpo naman itong virus.
Well, this is something that can easily be contained, no? Because as long as we know the carrier of the virus, which is a fruit bat, madaling ma-prevent yan. It's a matter of informing and educating people who are living in areas where there are fruit bats to really wash their hands, not handle fruit bats, or not even eat this type of animal during the time that there is an alarm or an outbreak. No? Because the most important mode of transmission here is really handling these fruit bats or being contaminated because you handle the fruits that are being also eaten by these bats, or the other mode of transmission, the fruit bats can also infect other animals. And one of the most common animals being infected in some outbreaks in Asia before is the pig. No, so the microorganism contaminated the fruit bat, contaminated the pig contaminated the people or the human being who handles the pig, and that's the cycle of transmission. Very easy to contain as long as we know we need to document first if there is someone here in the Philippines carrying it, but I don't think the one happening now in Cagayan de Oro, I don't think it's related with Nipah virus.
Exactly, Doc, no, yun nga yung reason bakit ka namin inimbata tonight. Kasi natatakot yung mga tao because lumalabas, of course, sa social media na may mga cases nga or outbreaks itong Nipah virus right now in India. And of course, here, ang dami daw schools na nagsasara for sanitation or to be disinfected because ang dami raw nagkakasakit na estudyante. Do we have any idea what is going on in Cagayan de Oro? What other viruses are common, especially ngayon na ang dami rin nating na-experience dito sa Manila, may smog, madumi, so nagkaka-allergy yung mga tao, inuubo. Of course, there's still the flu, there's still COVID around, and what other viruses should be looking out for?
Well, Shawn, no, that's a very good question because during this time of the year, when we are in the September, October, November, December, respiratory viruses is really common, no? And that causes some of these upper respiratory tract manifestations in the form of headache, fever, and sore throat. It's not only influenza that can also give you that symptom. There are also COVID, but there are other viruses that is so common and can easily be transmitted through close contact, no? Like in schools or in children. These are your adenovirus and respiratory syncytial virus, no? Viruses that may not be so common as we always think of because we are so exposed with influenza or COVID, but several years now, and there are new data to tell us that these two viruses are very common to cause upper respiratory tract infections, especially in children and in those who are elderly.
So how will you know, Doc, kung hindi na ito simpleng symptoms lang ng flu? Kasi meron silang pagkakahawig eh. So paano namin malalaman as ordinary people na teka, baka Nipah virus na ito? Ano dapat namin gawin?
Yeah, that's something that's very difficult, Maricel, no? Because all of these upper respiratory viral infections will really present with the same clinical manifestations. And the only way to really differentiate them is to do the test. But the problem is we don't have a good test for adenovirus and respiratory syncytial virus. But the commonality of all of these upper respiratory viruses, they are self-limited. Ibig sabihin, 3 days, 4 days after the symptoms, they will disappear. Doesn't need treatment, doesn't need what we call antiviral agents. But this is just something that to remind everyone. If you are an elderly in the vulnerable population, this mild type of viral infections might also become severe, just like COVID. No? So it's important to send a message that for elderly and those who are immunocompromised and with comorbid conditions, we need to tell them that they should wear face masks, and if they have symptoms, they have to consult their doctor.
So pareho pa rin po, no? Face mask pa rin when it comes to dealing with the Nipah virus, just to be clear on that.
Yes, Gretchen, it's important, no, because especially now, we are now in the bare months, no. I really advise people, especially the children and the vulnerable population, to wear the face mask. Even a cloth face mask can be effective in really filtering this organism, a surgical face mask, just to make sure, no, that nobody in the family that is vulnerable will be exposed also to this upper respiratory tract viral infections.
So yun ang advice nyo, Doc Solante, no, para hindi magkalat sa mga eskwelahan. As we know, of course, kids stuck in a classroom together the whole day, pati yung mga teacher nila, hindi na raw kinakaya ng clinics. I've been seeing this on my Facebook feed for the last 2 weeks. So marami talagang nagkakasakit. And just to avoid yung kind of that panic sowing when people are saying na, naku, para siyang COVID, kaya lang negative kasi sa antigen yung anak ko. May mga nakita akong ganun eh. Baka itong COVID variant na to, hindi na raw na-detect ng antigen tests. May ganun po bang ano?
Well, hindi. Ganun talaga yan, no? Because even COVID-19, the current tests are still good in detecting COVID-19, no? In fact, we are still using that. We still have patients with COVID, although mild na lang. But we have to realize that there are in fact, there are hundreds of upper respiratory viral infections that are really common in people, no? Even in tropical countries like the Philippines. So mag-ingat lang tayo at the same time, no, it's important that palakasin ang immune system, you drink lots of water, and napaka-importante yung tamang information, no? We should not panic. Sabihin natin may Nipah virus ang India or whatever is that, but we should not panic also na magkalat tayo ng misinformation na Nipah virus, no? Because that will only add up to the panic, and you know, when people gets panicky, then they may not be able to do what is really appropriate.
Doc, 40 to 75% fatality rate daw itong Nipah virus. Isn't that concerning? I mean, just comparing it to COVID na 3 to 4% yung death rate niya. I mean, how dangerous is this virus given also that it attacks the brain?
Yeah, that's why the WHO is currently monitoring this, no? Because not because of its ability to be easily transmitted, unlike COVID, but its ability to be highly fatal and highly deadly, and it can really kill. No, having an infection with a 50 to 75 case fatality rate is just like an Ebola. If you remember when the Ebola outbreak in some Western African countries, that 5 out of 7 or 8 die with treatment. These are the same mode of viral infections that are really deadly.
How should we prepare our borders then? I mean, do you think we have the mechanism to keep the virus out of the Philippines currently?
Well, we don't have border control anymore, no. So it's really important that people should be aware that if they travel from countries with an ongoing outbreak, we have to give them that responsibility that if they are sick, they should stay home. They should observe themselves, and if the symptoms will really persist, then they have to call the doctor. They have to report their symptoms, in order for us not to transmit or not to increase the spread of the infection.
So kanya-kanya muna.
Oo, kanya-kanya. Dapat naman talaga, kung may natutunan tayo sa COVID, di ba, dapat pangalagaan natin yung sarili natin. And of course, be mindful na huwag natin mahawaan yung mga ibang tao. So ulitin lang natin, Doc, no, to prevent panic about this Nipah virus, no, na itong mga little pockets of viral outbreaks that are being experienced around the Philippines, especially around Metro Manila and in schools. This is just related to the flu season as well as those other common viruses that abound during the Burr months.
Yes, correct. And it's something that we have to be used of, no? It's just that last year there was also something like this, no? It usually starts October, November. So it's just that because of the Nipah virus thing, people are more aware of the symptoms, so they usually compare it, the similarity. Kaya nagkaganon na binigyan natin ng pansin, no? So we need to be vigilant about it also.
All right. Thank you for joining us this evening, Dr. Rontgene Solante. Senators came face-to-face with leaders of the Socorro Bayanihan Services Incorporated, which has been accused of child and sexual abuse as well as other illegal acts. Present during the Senate committee hearing were the group's leader, J. Rense Kilario, or Senyor Aguila, as well as other members and officers of Socorro Bayanihan Services, including Karen Sanico, Janet Ahok, and Mamerto Galanida. There, the group denied once more the allegations that it is a cult. However, Senator Risa Ontiveros insisted that the group's activities are cult-like.
Ang tawag sa gobyerno nila, Nueva Jerusalem Esperanza Ministry Government. Pambihira, kakaiba din talaga ang karisma ni J. Renz Kilario o ang tinatawag na Senyor Aguila. Ayon sa ating mga witnesses, siya ay nagkakasal, nagbibinyag, nagpaparusa, nagbibigay ng atas sa araw-araw. Siya ang reincarnation ni Santo Niño. Siya ang Ginoo. Sus Ginoo.
Now, aside from all the allegations that we've already heard of, there were also new ones that came to light during the hearing. For one, members who disobey the rules inside Sitio Kapihan are forced to swim in quote-unquote Aroma Beach as a punishment. But according to Senator Ontiveros, Aroma Beach is named as such because it is a man-made pit filled with human urine and feces. One of the witnesses also mentioned that rule breakers are jailed in the Foxhole, a guarded small house in the middle of the forest. They are also made to spin a roulette to determine the kind of punishment that they will get, which includes being hit with a paddle, among others. The allegation of the group having a private army was also discussed. Senator Bato de la Rosa even showed a photo of Kilario, along with his members that are all dressed like soldiers, even bearing arms. But Kilario claims that these guns are actually fake.
Bakit meron silang armas?
Hindi po yan armas, sir.
Ano yan?
Kahoy po yan.
Kahoy.
Meron pong mga iba't ibang klaseng programa for the members po. At during that time po, isa po yan parang contest po between the clusters po. Parang tapos parang sila po yung nanalo. Parang kasi po sikat na sikat po noon yung time po ng Cardo, yung sa probinsyano. So it was parang reenactment po of that parang drama, may drama contest po.
Speaking of witnesses, some victims of the Surigao del Norte-based group were also present during the hearing to testify on the allegations. First to give her testimony was a girl named Jane. Jane said she was only 14 years old when she was forced to marry another SBSI member who was 18 at the time. She said Senyor Aguila would instruct the couple to consummate the marriage within 3 days, even if the wife protests. Brides who resisted, she says, were told that they were committing a sin.
Sinabi ni Senyor Aguila, authorized ang asawa mo i-rape ka?
Kailangan ay among tulo ka adlaw di mi makuha nganlan mi ka-Diyos.
Kailangan daw makuha sila in 3 days, otherwise they will be called na nag-adyos. Kakausapin sila, Your Honor, sasabihin na maimpyerno sila pag hindi sila pumayag.
For their part, Kilario denied that he sanctioned child marriages and stopped scores of children from attending school. Ahok likewise denied that there were child marriages, despite one witness in the hearing having said that Ahok's own child was among those who were married off. For now, the Senate has cited Kilario, Ahok, Galanida, and Sanico in contempt and have been placed in detention in the Senate.
Sino nagkasal, Mark, sa kanila?
Si Senyor, sir.
Si Senyor.
Senyor Aguila.
Senyor Aguila. Sumagot ka. Senyor Aguila. Kinasal mo yung anak ni Janet Ahok?
Uya, sir. Uya. Di na tinuod. Kanang mga bata.
Answer me squarely. Kinasal mo ba yung anak ni Janet Ahok o hindi?
Uya. Hindi.
Uya, hindi.
Uya.
I respectfully move to cite in contempt J. Renz Kilario, Mamerto Galanida, Janet Ahok, and Karen Sanico. I so move, Mr. Chair.
Wow, so mas marami pa tayong natutunan about this group, itong SBSI, Socorro Bayanihan Services. Mukhang may armas nga, although they denied it. So,
Ginaya lang daw nila sa teleserye na inspire.
Ang probinsyano.
Ang probinsyano.
Si Cardo may kasalanan.
Oo. Bakit kasi nang inspire?
Hindi, pero may nakita ko dito online na parang may pinakita si Senator Risa Hontiveros na internal family planning form showing na pinakasalan nga yung ito, may isang 15-year-old forcibly married by the Socorro Bayanihan Services. So, may mga dokumento, meron tayong nakitang photos. Also, kanina nagkaroon ng viewing party doon sa Surigao del Norte. Tinanong namin si Gio Robes ano yung reaction ng mga tao doon. Nagugulit daw sila dito sa mga aligasyon.
So, parang
hindi rin sila aware.
Kumbaga wala silang
pero na-convince sila na sumama doon.
May mga parang reactions of surprise and shock over
what's really going on. Kasi medyo isolated sila, di ba? Nung pumunta nga si
Parang
Mon Gualvez
magkahiwalay.
doon parang akit ka pa ng bundok tapos magbabangka ka pa sa Bukas Grande from the mainland. So, they're
Papunta
pretty
Sitio
isolated.
Kapihan.
Oo, medyo malupit yung travel papunta. Gretchen, daanan mo nga. Check mo ano mga nangyayari doon. Baka
Pero
pwede
dinedeny pa rin nila na merong child abuse.
Oo, at child marriages na nangyayari.
Child marriages. Kahit sinabi na 15 years old, kinasal.
So ngayon ay I think naka-detain sila sa Senado, itong apat na sinite for contempt. So what happens now to J. Renz Kilario, also known as Senior Aguila, as well as the other officials of Socorro Bayanihan Services? Alamin natin mula kay Camille Samonte. Go ahead, Camille.
Shawn, that's right. After the hearing, J. Renz Kilario, aka Senior Aguila, and 3 more officials of the Socorro Bayanihan Services were detained in the Senate. They will stay there for about a week or until Senators Bato de la Rosa and Risa Hontiveros decide how long they will be detained. The Senate will also be the one to bring them back to Socorro, where the hearings will be next held. Meanwhile, the witnesses who face the group will remain in the custody of the DSWD along with their legal counsel. Justice Undersecretary Nicolas T., who was also present in the hearing, requested that the Kilario and the other individuals be allowed to attend the preliminary probe of the DOJ. Senator Bato de la Rosa said the 4 would be allowed to attend the probe, saying that they will make the necessary communication. Shawn?
Thanks for that update, Camille Samonte.
Security in the town of Socorro was tightened as the Senate investigated the alleged abuses of Socorro Bayanihan Services. The group, as well as some residents, even organized a public viewing of the hearing. Mixed emotions nga raw habang nagaganap yung hearing. May mga residenteng takot, may mga nasasaktan at may mga nanlulumo sa mga nabubulgar sa pagdinig. That's why some residents called on the Socorro LGU to increase police presence in the area. Face-to-face classes have been suspended until tomorrow, while government work is limited as a precautionary measure.
Meron talagang mga haka-haka na meron silang gagawin. Pero biniverify pa naman yun, kaya nga pinaghahandaan natin.
Members of the Socorro Bayanihan Services threw support behind their leader. They said that the truth will come out during the Senate hearing. According to some members, they contributed money for Senyor Aguila's transportation to attend the hearing in Manila.
Medyo naawa lang kasi yung mga sinabi nila, yung hindi totoo. Tapos pinaratangan lang kami dito na namumuhay dito ng tahimik. Hindi siya makulong dahil naniniwala kami sa Kanya, sa Panginoon, na sana yung patas na ang mangyayari.
Well, up next, the House of Representatives has approved the spending plan of the Marcos administration for 2024, despite intense criticism from the chamber's opposition bloc. More on that when the big story returns. Keep it here. You're watching the big story here on One News. The House of Representatives passed the proposed 5.7 trillion peso national budget on third and final reading. But discussions got quite heated ahead of the voting when New Fight lawmaker Kabataan Party List Representative Raul Manuel tried to question the speedy passage of the General Appropriations Bill.
Madam Speaker, ano po ang basis ng emergency or calamity sa certification? Madam Speaker, hindi din naman
there's already a certification coming from the Office of the President. I think
the
Chair now rules that the point of the
Madam Speaker,
gentleman,
hindi pa po ako tapos. Madam
the
Speaker,
Honorable
Madam Speaker,
Manuel, is out of order.
Speaker, question of
Majority
privilege. Madam Speaker, question
Madam
of privilege.
Speaker, I reiterate my motion. There is a motion, the motion to proceed with the third reading on House Bill number 8980. So move, Madam Speaker.
Secretary
General's directed to read the title of the measure and therefore call the roll for nominal voting.
Pinatayan siya ng mic. Ano?
Oo, bigyan mo natin ng context no, kung ano yung napanood natin na kaguluhan na yun. Yun yung kabataan rep, si Raul Manuel, trying to question kung bakit daw sinertify ni President Marcos as urgent yung budget bill or yung GAB na wala naman daw public calamity o emergency. Which ang tinatry niya i-explain is that bago mo i-certify ang isang bill as urgent, ay dapat merong mga emergency nga or calamity.
Oo, parang sa Maharlika Investment Fund, remember that was also the issue.
Lagi, oo. Kasi nga, ayon yan sa Constitution, hindi naman gawa-gawa lang natin. Right? So, ayun nga, pinatayan siya ng mic. Tapos tumuloy-tuloy lang yung the rest of the congressmen to vote on the budget.
Bakit kasi nagmamadali? Kasi pagka sinertify as urgent, ibig sabihin kahit na pumasa na sa second reading, same day, pwede na nilang ipasa dire-diretso sa third reading.
Kasi normally, dapat magkaibang araw yung second at third reading.
So parang kulang ng paghihimay, kumbaga. Pero ang sinasabi kasi ng Congress, meron pa namang bycam.
Especially because yesterday, meron nga tayong change in tone, right? Regarding the confidential funds. Ang tanong, na-realign ba? Paano ma-realign?
At magkano ang ma-realign?
Pero buo,
pa ba yun?
Hindi siya naggalaw eh. At least yung pumasa last night.
Yung pumasa, yung total figure no,
Yung
is
total
as
figure.
is, sa 5.768 trillion.
And during the nominal voting, some 296 lawmakers voted in favor of the budget, while only 3 opposition congressmen, all from the Makabayan bloc, voted against it. Now, when it was Manuel's turn to cast his vote, he again went to the podium to speak up about how the majority treated him while he was delivering his earlier speech. Deputy Minority Leader Paul Daza even came to Manuel's defense.
Madam Speaker,
Yes.
Madam
The Honorable
Speaker,
Manuel.
the tyranny of the majority has been displayed. And Madam Speaker, with that, I vote no, and I would like to explain my vote later. Pinatayin pa po ako ng mic, Madam Speaker, nakakabastos naman sa mamamayan.
We're a collegial body, it's a democracy. The Honorable Manuel was properly recognized. We should have just let him finish what he had to say.
So, ang ending,
Natuloy pa rin yung botohan.
ayun nga, so 296 yes, 3 no's, and Albay representative, of course, member rin ng minorya, no? Si Congressman Edsel Lagman, he also voted yes with reservations. He insists no, na dapat talagang alisin ang confidential and intelligent funds. Ayun nga, so nabanggit nga natin no, na yung sabi nga natin masaya, yung buong total, pumasa naman yung 5.768 trillion pesos. No?
And under the General Appropriations Bill, that is the highest in history.
Grabe.
Over 10 billion of that budget is allocated to CIFs. Almost half or 4.5 billion ang nakalaan sa Office of the President. Pinaka-controversial though ay syempre yung sa OVP at DepEd nga na pinag-usapan natin kahapon na may combined na 650 million pesos.
Na gusto nilang ilipat.
To the security agencies involved in defending the West Philippine
West
Sea.
Philippine Sea, which is logical.
It's logical. Tingnan natin no, kung magkano. Kating-kating na akong malaman kung magkano yung marirealign talaga. At kung saan nilang tatapyasan yun. Kasi maraming ahensya naman yung nakakuha ng CIF.
At kung matutuloy.
Uy, mahaba pa yung oras, so let's see. Prior to the passage, of course, House leaders have agreed to take away the confidential funds of the Office of the Vice President, the Education Department, and other civilian agencies, and realign these to agencies that focus on national security and defense in the West Philippine Sea. Paano ito mangyayari now that the budget has been passed on final reading? Our Congress reporter Marian Enriquez explains.
Yes, Muslim political party leaders at the House of Representatives are still looking to realign confidential and intelligence funds of agencies that have nothing to do with surveillance and intelligence. When the budget was passed last night, there were no amendments made, at least just yet. Lawmakers instead formed a small committee led by House Appropriations Chair Elizalde Co to fix budget realignments. Their deliberations will determine whether the proposed CIFs of the OVP and DepEd and other civilian agencies will just be slashed or will ultimately be removed. The House and Senate will convene in December for the bicameral conference committee, and only then we will be able to confirm if the confidential funds have been removed or if there's still a chance that they will be granted to these agencies. All proposed amendments to the budget are expected to be submitted by September 29, and after that, the General Appropriations Bill will be transmitted to the Senate. Maset.
Ang tagal pa ng BICAM, December. Let's see what will happen. Thanks for that, Marian Enriquez.
December pa pala yung BICAM. Ito, baka naman pwede rin nilang paglaanan ng special funds because the Information and Communications Technology Department has promised that it will fully restore the security and the stability of PhilHealth systems. But many are already asking, kailan daw ito? This, of course, comes in the aftermath of a cyber attack done by ransomware group Medusa, which demanded some 16 million pesos as ransom for stolen data. The DICT says it is now actively investigating and monitoring acquired logs from PhilHealth systems. The agency notes that as of Monday, PhilHealth's critical web services are accessible only via their IP addresses. Meanwhile, PhilHealth has also admitted that they have yet to bring back normal operations of their website. They say they are now doing their best to restore operations of their main website, member portal, and e-claim system. As for the claims of private hospitals, PhilHealth spokesperson Francis Paragas told Radyo 5's Failon that they are given 90 days or until December to process these.
We are given around 90 days or until December to pay for the 27 billion. And so patuloy pa rin po ang pagpoproseso natin ngayon. Dangan nga lamang Manong Ted na medyo apektado kasi ay mano-mano. Kaya po minamadali din natin na maitaayos ang ating system.
After the break, we'll be speaking with Ramon Magsaysay Awardee Miriam Coronel-Ferrer, the first woman to lead the government's peace panel. Stay tuned to that when the big story returns.
You're still watching The Big Story here on One News. Our next guest tonight was the first woman to head the government's peace panel and is also the first female chief negotiator in the world to sign a final peace accord with a rebel group. She has recently been accorded a Ramon Magsaysay Award, and for those not in the know, that is Asia's equivalent of a Nobel Peace Prize. It is our pleasure to have here on the show, Miriam Coronel-Ferrer. Welcome to The Big Story.
Thank you, Shawn, Maricel,
We have
Gretchen.
you to thank for the peace process in Mindanao.
What have you been busy with these days?
Well, now we're doing some dialogues and behind-the-scene mediation in relation to other conflicts in the world. For example, we know that Myanmar just is in a very bad state, diba? Because of the coup, and then there's a civil war effectively. So we're a group of women, actually, about 8 of us from Southeast Asia. And we've banded together to pool our whatever capital we have, political capital, social capital, to be able to go around and see how we can facilitate some resolution or maybe open spaces for dialogue.
Apart from Myanmar, where else are you focused right now? You are apart from?
Well, we have some work going on on Afghanistan. Also along the lines of bringing together different groups, people, to see what's going to happen next. I mean, to think about the future of Afghanistan. But some of these really are not something we put out in the press because it's really quite diplomacy, and it's a lot of investment. It takes time, as we know. No peace process happens in an instant, di ba?
Definitely not as fast as they depict in Netflix.
Definitely
Kasi parang
not.
mabilis. Yeah.
Mas series yung
di ba?
Our own negotiations.
Have you always been a mediator? I mean, looking back at your youth, kayo po ba yung pagbati sa mga nag-aaway?
Dati ako yung nakipag-sparring sa mga male cousins ko eh.
Nagsisimula
Pag inaapi yung mga kapinsan kong babae. So parang pero naman, kumbaga siguro medyo naman ako yung sa tatay ko, medyo cool lang, di ba? Ganyan siya. Hindi siya nagagalit kaagad kung ano.
Pero ma'am, how did this all start? I mean, ikaw, paano ka napasok sa government peace panel? What inspired you?
Remember 2010 election, di ba? Which the late President Simeon Benigno Aquino III won. So what we did was to prepare a policy paper together with Justice Marvic Leonen. So I talked to him and said, can we work together and convene several universities, professors from several universities, and let's write a policy paper on what to do with the peace process with the more Islamic Liberation Front, coming from the Supreme Court decision that shut down the previous agreement, and you had some major warfare in 2008, 2009. And we presented that to all the presidential candidates. And the one who was most receptive was the team of President Noynoy. So afterwards, both Marvic and I were invited to join the team.
After he won.
Yes, and more or less, yung policy paper namin, some of the major recommendations there was the one we actually carried through. Of course, with Pinoy's guidance at the time.
What are you most proud of from that policy paper na, kasi alam naman natin lahat, especially Gretchen, na kagaling lang sa Basilan, how far things have gone? Diba? We've had, the peace process was long. It's been over a decade.
Yes.
What are you most proud of na nakita mo parang, wow, it actually happened?
So number one is that wala nang bakbakan sa pagitan ng Philippine government at saka the biggest, most organized armed group in the country, which is the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Much bigger in terms of number and concentrated, diba? Compared, for example, with the Communist Party of the Philippines New People's Army. So that means that you free up a lot of resources. You free up you open the space to actually do development programs where in areas that were previously battle zones. But of course, the peace negotiations with the MILF does not solve all the problems of the country and even of Mindanao, di ba? Kasi ang iniwasan nga natin dito yung magkaroon ng mga extremist. Kaya habang tumagal yung negotiations, dumadami yung extremist.
What was key in getting that signed?
Siguro yung one is that we were able to build the confidence that we will really work for a just resolution. But at the same time, because the whole government was really behind this, so they all kept an open mind. Kasi maraming mga usapin dito na maybe some of these would be considered yung masyado kang marami, no? Kung maraming binibigay, parang sinasabi, ganyan. But that kind of open mind na it's not about giving too much, it's about rectifying.
Nung nandun po ako sa Basilan kasi parang tinitingnan ko yung mga rebelde, no? Some of them have, may nakapatong sa ulo na ransom money. Pero dahil dun sa agreements, parang may pardon sila eh. How do you negotiate in good faith, even when there are deep wounds brought by the battles?
It takes two, both sides yan. Kasi pati sa military, they also feel like that. Kasi marami rin namatay sa kanila throughout the decades of the warfare, di ba? It's really being able to look to the future. Kasi I remember one incident, sinasabi, yung police dun sa consultations namin, galit na galit. Sinasabi, ganito yung naranasan ko. So hindi mo dinideny na talagang nagkaroon ng violence all around, di ba? Pero ang question is, sa kabilang side may ganyan din. So paano na? Ano nang dapat mangyari dito? Tuloy-tuloy na lang ba ito?
So parang siyang relationship talaga.
Pagbabago mo ng relationship.
Pero ma'am, you mentioned earlier about yung additional extremists kapag nagkakaroon ng ganitong klase ng negotiation. So how should the government deal with those extremists? Kasi hanggang ngayon nag-e-exist pa rin naman. There's VIFF, meron pang
mga breakaway
groups, diba? So parang I know wala naman sila, hindi naman on the table yung kanilang negotiation. Pero I mean, how should we deal with it?
Unang-una siguro, the best approach is not so much actual warfare. Una, how do you prevent bombings? O itong mga ang laking component is really intelligence work. Second is the socio-economic base for that, di ba? Bakit ba may alienation to the point na umaabot sa isang napaka-radical na ideology. So, ano yung deprivation? Although, interestingly, yung mga sumasama nga sa violent extremist groups are not really the poorest of the poor. Marami sa kanila college graduates.
Talaga? More of ideologues, diba?
Ideologues. Tapos, siguro nga, meron sense of masyadong, hindi nila na-feel na part sila nitong ganitong mundo.
Did you say, dyan na lang may pagkukulang? Kanina I asked you, what were you most proud of? Ngayon, parang, saan mo nakikita yung biggest pagkukulang pa or area that we can work on and improve on? And what can we do?
I think, malaking bagay sa politics natin eh. Kailangan mo talagang baguhin how we do our politics.
Mahirap pa yata yun, ma'am.
Ang lahat ng bagay na determine ng mga decisions na dinidecide, di ba? Halimbawa ngayon, magkakaroon ng election dun sa lugar din mismo, di ba? And yung electoral violence and why, di ba? So, ibig sabihin dito, yung ating yung nakagawian ng mga political clans, for example, or the political class na sinasabi, kailangan magkaroon din ng transformation sa value system nila, sa pamamalakad, at saka yung tao din. Kasi otherwise, mapipilitan yung gustong mag-reform to play the game. Di ba? To survive. Ito nga ang punto mo, kailangan mag-reform ka, pero you have to change the rules and also the way things are done. Pero kung hindi nagbabago yun, maski yung gustong mag-reform, they get caught in the system.
And parang nilamon ka na lang ng sistema.
If you can't beat them, join them.
Parang that's the
diba?
main problem naman of those who enter politics.
Kaya nga both sides
speaking
talaga.
Speaking of politics, nakasagutan niyo noon si Alan Peter Cayetano. Sinabi niya, the policy is not to negotiate with terrorists. When do you know when to pull the plug on negotiations?
Everybody was labeled terrorist before. Lahat ng past peace agreements, IRA, Irish Republican Army, one of the early agreements, 1998 Good Friday Agreement, di ba terrorist din sila? But you had the agreement. And alam natin yung saying, di ba? One man's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. So parang pag linilabel mo lang terrorist yan, therefore you don't negotiate. And who decides na terrorist sila? Of course, you can judge, di ba, certain acts are really violent. But the big question again, so what now? How do you solve this problem? Patayan na lang ba? Ang ano dito is to really find a way na hindi na kailangan gumamit ng karahasan
But then
all
how
the
do you
time.
negotiate with someone that you can't trust? I mean, I put into this question forward because of the current tensions with China, Philippines and China. For
Yes.
example, in that context, how do you negotiate with somebody who has, let's say, not followed through with what they
Yung
said?
sinasabi
Paano
nila.
Or yung
gagawin
actions
ganun?
nila, tsaka yung
talagang-
sinasabi nila, hindi nagtutugma.
Talagang aggressive, halimbawa, or you have, one is yung framework. I think we already have the framework in the case of China, which is the international legal framework, di ba? And then how do you create that kind of support base to advance that framework? So ang ano dito, gusto ba natin talagang umabot sa punto na magkaroon ng gera? Ayaw
Pero
natin.
dehado tayo dun.
Kaya nga, dehado tayo doon. Kaya nga malakas ang loob nila, di ba? Pero kaya ang ano natin dito, moral, legal, diplomatic pa din. So doon papasok pa rin yung how do you negotiate. You will still have to create open lines, back channels, kung pwede, which is a very popular approach sa mediation, so-called back channels.
Is it
di
still
ba?
possible
Back
to
channeling.
negotiate with China given that ano ma-leverage natin, ano ma-offer natin?
It's
within the
not
scale and
possible
means?
not to negotiate with China, which we are actually doing.
We are
Kasi
back-channeling.
meron tayong ambassador doon, meron tayong special office. I mean, it's really like that, di ba? You try all lines. Maski na you stand firm on where you stand, which is basically, kamukha nung ginawa ngayon, thankfully, pinutol yung lubid, whatever it is, di ba? So, but at the same time, may iba ka pang channels to be able to find a really good solution and to avoid any more parang extreme action. So, calibration talaga yan eh. Mahirap talaga eh. Magka-calibrate ka talaga eh.
Saka, diplomatic. Balik muna tayo dito sa Pilipinas. I'm sure it did not miss your attention. So, napag-usapan na natin yung gulo sa baba, sa South. CPP and PA. Where are we at there? Ano nangyayari? And that, that peace process, those peace talks have always faltered, they've always
True.
failed.
Tagal na, no?
And now we've lost Joma season, right? And then last week, yung dalawang aktivista na inaresto / sumurrender / hindi na natin alam kung ano yung totoong nangyari, di ba? What's your reaction to that?
My first reaction is, kailangan, maski na may gera, you observe human rights. You observe international humanitarian law, both sides. So ano ibig sabihin dito? Yung patayan through warfare is acceptable during war. Pero yung assassination, abduction, torture, bawal yan under international humanitarian law. So yun yung basic starting point eh. Paano mo mako-convince yung dalawang parties to play within the framework of international humanitarian law, which is the law of war, no? Para yung violence, yung human rights violations on both sides ma-avoid. Kasi alam naman natin, especially on the side of yung kabila, bakit ba sila nakaka-recruit? Kasi may sentimiento, may nakikita na yun nga, may human rights violations o wala kang makikitang reform. May social basis yung pagsali ng mga kabataan dito.
Saan sa tingin nyo, dahil napag-uusapan na rin po natin, confidential funds, anong mga ahensya po ang kailangan nitong confidential funds based on your experience and your wisdom of where these funds should be allocated and are needed the most?
Siyempre sa security sector talaga yung yung job ng intelligence. Although ang intelligence work is everywhere, 'di ba? Sa finance, sa economics, lahat meron component ganyan. But medyo misaligned if ang laki ng priority pagdating sa education, where in fact what you want to foster is critical thinking, where what you want to foster is yung ganong klaseng yung discussion, discourse, di ba? Hindi mo binababa sa estudyante kung anong dapat nilang isipin o paano sila dapat tinuturo mo sila kung paano mag-analyze o paano tumingin. So, kung ganun masyado yung focus, halimbawa, kung ganun pupunta yung tanong sa Department of Education ba, dapat meron malaking budget or even sa opisina ng Vice President, meron talagang question of proportionality, which is an important principle, di ba?
Kung relative to
your mandate, relative to others.
Huli-huli na po, kasi kayo bilang isang babae, alam po natin na para makapasok po dun sa mga, cultural territories, women are not always as respected as we would want them to be. What do you think is the role of women in the conflict down south, and what do you think is the power that you've brought to the table when it comes to negotiating?
So, role of women now, after we've signed the agreement, ang maganda kasi dito, you have a new generation na ang kinagisnan nila ay yung peace advocacy. As against the 1970s generation, tulad na nila Mr. Iqbal, Mahogany Iqbal, at saka ni Ibrahim Murad ngayon, lumaki sila in their youth na gera ang pinuntahan nila. So both, yun yung maganda, even for the women, nakita nila na now is the time really to also open up the bigger discourse about women's rights. Kasi kung dati ang priority ng diskurso nila ay yung kanilang karapatan bilang Moro, bilang Muslim, di ba, sa ating bansa. Ngayon, meron ka ng mas magandang espasyo. At nakita naman natin yan, yung bagong electoral code na ipinasa ng Bangsamoro Parliament, may quota system para sa regional political parties, at least 30% for women. So, dati parang hindi mo ma-imagine na mangyayari yan.
Nararamdaman na.
Wala yan sa National Election Code natin.
Ituloy-tuloy lang natin.
Itutuloy yun.
Right. You know what? We could talk here all day, all night about all
you.
the problems, the processes, the solutions, but we have run out of time. Thank you so much.
Mag-enroll na lang tayo sa UK.
Salamat.
Nag-retire na ako.
Nag-retired. Busy na po siya. Si Miss Miriam. Okay, maraming salamat for your time tonight.
Thank you.
2023 Ramon Magsaysay Awardee, Peace Negotiator, Miriam Coronel-Ferrer. Alright, before we go, may konting oras pa tayo para sa ating big picture tonight. It is President Marcos having a phone conversation with French President Emmanuel Macron. The Presidential Communications Office, which released the photos, said that territorial and security issues in the West Philippine Sea were among those topics that the two leaders talked about, which PBBM also thanked Macron for his country's support. President Marcos also extended an invitation to Macron to come and visit the Philippines. This year also marks the 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the Philippines and France. And that's it for the show tonight.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thank you for tuning in and have a good night.